Have you ever heard of the shot heard around the world? Have you ever heard of it before you saw that video just then? Well, it's in our lesson today. We are starting the American Revolution today. What an exciting unit we're going to be on. And so it's going to include lots of fighting. It's going to include battles and famous people. And we're going to throw in some Liberty Kid videos. I know those are fun to watch and they help us understand what we've been learning about. So you're really going to like this unit. It's kind of long on the Revolutionary War. It's one of my favorite parts of social studies to teach every year. And so today we're going to do the first lesson on it. So I want in your book, in your social studies book, if you would get it, please, and open it up to page 24. Open your social studies book to page 24. So we're going to pretty much read about what you just heard about in the Andy Griffith video, the shot heard around the world in the beginning of the Revolutionary War. But we're going to even learn some more about it, okay? So social studies books to page 24, and I'm going to shrink myself, and we're going to go through this lesson together. We're going to read pages 24 through page 29 is where we're going to be today. So some of our questions: how did the colonists come together to fight against Britain? We know Benjamin Franklin wanted the colonists to come together. Remember his join or die little snake, that political cartoon? Well, now they're going to join together. How did they join together? But this time they're fighting the British. Where did the American Revolution begin? Where was the first shot? That shot heard around the world fired. How did the colonists become divided over independence? Divided means they're not together. So some colonists want independence and some don't. We'll talk about what independence means. And then what was the purpose of the Declaration of Independence? So we're going to answer these 4 questions in our lesson today. We'll also talk about the battles of Lexington and Concord, the Declaration of Independence, the First Continental Congress. We'll read about Loyalists and Minutemen and Patriots. We have the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, and then Tories. All right, let's get started. Page 24. And remember the last thing we read about were those intolerable acts, where the king closed Boston Harbor and was making all these new rules, and bossy king. They were getting mad about it. When Parliament began passing new taxes, people in every colony were unhappy, but they were not working together to solve problems. When British officials closed the port in Boston, the colonists finally realized we need to work together. Remember, that was something that was intolerable. They couldn't stand what the king was doing to them anymore. So they decided to come together. In 1774, all of the colonies except Georgia sent special representatives called delegates to a meeting in Philadelphia. The meeting was called the First Continental Congress. So here's that one right there we talked about. A Congress is a group of people who meet to discuss important issues or problems and make decisions. In all, 55 delegates met and talked about the problems the colonies were having with the British government. So it's a group of 55 men from all the colonies except Georgia meeting together to talk about the problems they're having with the British. And it's called the First Continental Congress. What did they do? Some of the most important men in the colonies attended the First Continental Congress. George Washington and Patrick Henry were among the delegates representing Virginia. Cousins John Adams and Sam Adams represented Massachusetts. The delegates wrote a petition listing their complaints and asking that changes be made. And they sent the petition to King George III. They also agreed on the following. Each colony would set up a militia, like a little army, to be used in emergencies. The colonies would start another boycott of trade with Britain. Remember, boycott means they're not going to buy any things that's made in Britain. And the delegates would meet again if the king did not respond to their petition in a way that pleased them. So basically, they wrote a letter to the king and they said, okay, we want you to take away these taxes. We're unhappy with your taxes. We don't like the way you did the people in Boston. You shouldn't be doing that. So we want you to stop. Then these are the 3 things they also agreed on. Well, let's see what happens. It looks like the shot heard around the world happened. In the months after the Philadelphia meeting, that First Continental Congress, the colonists and the British begin preparations for war. It doesn't sound like the king liked their letter very much if they're preparing for war. He must not have done what they said, and I'm not surprised. He's the king. He's not going to listen to little old colonist. In Massachusetts, British soldiers marched to the towns of Lexington and Concord. They went in search of weapons the colonists might be hiding. But the people had been warned that the British soldiers were coming. Colonial soldiers called Minutemen because they could be ready in a minute to fight in a hurry. They grabbed their weapons and they went out to meet the British. So basically, you've got the British Army marching to these towns of Lexington and Concord because they heard a rumor that in Concord there were some weapons hidden, and there were. No one's quite sure what happened next, but when these Minutemen gathered to meet the British, a shot rang out, and soon more shots were fired, and men on both sides were killed. Many years later, a poet named Ralph Waldo Emerson called it the shot heard round the world. Why do you think he called it that? You couldn't really hear it around the world. Why do you think he might call it the shot heard round the world? Do you think it's because it affected the world forever? Yeah, that's probably it. The midnight, shot there started began a new country, the United States, and the United States has certainly changed the world forever. Eventually, the Minutemen chased the British soldiers all the way back to Boston. You know, they shot them in the butt as they were running back to Boston. Shoot those British soldiers, those redcoats, as they were retreating to Boston. The battles of Lexington and Concord have changed everything. The American Revolution had begun. So our first question, how did they come together? Well, they met in a meeting, the First Continental Congress, and talked about the problems they were having. Second question, how did the American Revolution begin, or where? It was in Lexington and Concord. Okay, and that's up in Massachusetts, not Lexington, Kentucky, but Lexington, Massachusetts, up here on this map. Over on the side, it talks about Paul Revere. Do you know the story of Paul Revere? He was the one riding through the countryside saying, "The British are coming, the British are coming." He was one of the Minutemen, telling the Minutemen to get ready, go fight the British. We'll talk more about him later. All right, let's go to the next page. Well, we had the First Continental Congress, and now we've got the Second Continental Congress. So the first one didn't work so well. They decided to meet again. If the king didn't do what they said, well, he didn't. So now they're meeting again. What happened in Massachusetts with the fighting at Lexington and Concord changed everything. The delegates met again in Philadelphia, and this meeting was called the Second Continental Congress. Remember, you had the first, and this one is the Second Continental Congress. By this time, more colonists wanted to break away from Great Britain. They wanted independence. And independence means freedom from the control of another person or group. The leaders of the Congress agreed to take the following actions. So these guys met again, and this time this is what they decided to do. Break away from Great Britain and start their own country. Holy moly, what in the world? They're not going to be part of England. They're going to start a brand new country. How do you think the king's going to feel about that? They're going to send a declaration to the king to announce their plans and explain their reasons for breaking away. A declaration is an official announcement. Thomas Jefferson, a delegate from Virginia, began work on this important document. What do you think it's going to be? The Declaration of, what do you think? Independence? Yeah. A declaration, a statement of freedom. They put George Washington in charge of the new Continental Army. Well, he had used to be a British soldier, remember? He was a good military man, and they put him in charge of the Continental Army. So you've got the British Army, sometimes they're called the Redcoats, and you've got the Continental Army. The Continental Army are the people living in the colonies who are forming an army to fight against the British. Okay? Now, taking sides. The colonists did not all agree about what to do when the war began. Friends and families argued about fighting against Great Britain. Some colonists did not want to be independent from Great Britain. Others thought it was a great idea. There were also colonists who did not want to support either side. They just wanted peace. So you had people on every side. You had people who said, "Oh, we are part of England. We need to be loyal to the king." You had people who said, Forget the king. He's being mean to us. Let's get rid of him and start our own country. Then you had people going, peace, man. You all just chill out. No fighting. Well, these people had some names. The ones who wanted to break away from the king, they're called patriots. Ever heard of the New England Patriots? Does that sound familiar? Yeah. That's where if you like football and you've watched the Patriots, they have a symbol on their helmet of a little soldier holding a gun. It's one of these soldiers from the Revolutionary War. Did you know that? You know where they play it? They play in Boston. Yeah. So New England Patriots, they get their name from these patriots right here. Some colonists were patriots. They wanted the colonies to become a country separate from Great Britain. They were willing to go to war against the British to gain independence. In other words, they're going to fight to be free from the king. But not everybody was a patriot in the colonies. There were some who were called loyalists. Another name for loyalist is Tories. What do you see? What base word do you see in loyalist? Loyal. Who do you think they were being loyal to? Yeah, the king. They were being loyal to the king. Some colonists remained loyal to the king. They were called loyalists or Tories. Some loyalists liked the idea of independence, but they did not want to go to war with Great Britain. After all, Great Britain had the most powerful army in the world. Other loyalists felt safer under British rule. They liked knowing that they had the support and protection of the British government. So you had a wide range of thoughts in the colonies. You had these guys, the Congress, getting ready to go to war with England, saying they're writing the Declaration of Independence to break away. You've got the Patriots saying, yeah, we're going to help you fight to get our freedom. And you've got some people who are loyalists going, what are you all thinking? It's good to have a king taking care of us. Who would you have sided with? Would you want to fight against the king, or would you have been loyal to the king? It's hard to know what we would have done back then, but I don't think I would have liked all the rules the king was making. All right, this page is all about the Declaration of Independence. During the Second Continental Congress, the delegates created a special committee to write another letter to the king. The letter would be a Declaration of Independence. The committee included big names. You've heard these names: Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, maybe not have heard of Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Robert R. Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. The group quickly decided Jefferson should do the writing. At 33 years old, he was much younger than the other men. He was shy and he did not like to speak in public, but he was an excellent writer. Are any of you like him? You don't really like talking in front of people, but you love to write? Writing the Declaration. Jefferson spent 17 days. Have you ever worked on a homework assignment for 17 days? Well, he did. He spent 17 days writing the Declaration of Independence. He explained why the colonists wanted to break away from Great Britain. He listed all the unfair things that King George III and Parliament had done to the American colonies. After listing the complaints against Great Britain, Jefferson wrote, "These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do." He ended the document with this line: "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor," saying they are together on this king. Here's what we think. After Jefferson finished his work, the document was ready to sign. It was copied on the special paper. John Hancock, who was the president of the Congress, signed it first. He wrote his name in very large letters. If you can look at, this is a copy of it here, and that big name right there, if you can see it in your book, it's John Hancock. He wrote it big so the king would be sure to know that he didn't like the king. Has anybody ever told you they need your John Hancock? That means they need your signature. He signed his bigger than anybody. Let's see. Let me read this sentence right here. One popular story says that Hancock signed it large so that the king could read his signature without his spectacles. But this is a myth. The rest of the leaders designed the declaration. I can't read today. The rest of the leaders signed the Declaration of Independence later. They did so at great risk. In the eyes of the king, these men were committing treason. Treason is the crime of trying to hurt your own government by selling its secrets or fighting against it. If the colonies lost, these men could all be put to death. So everybody's name on here could be put to death by the king. He could kill them all because he would be thinking they were committing treason. So when they signed it, they knew they were in danger. And so they hoped they would win the war. And so when did they sign it? Look up here. What day is it signed? July 4th. What do we know about July 4th? Well, it's Fireworks Day, right? It's called Independence Day. It's because on July 4th, 1776, the Second Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. The 13 colonies were now the United States of America. So for the first time ever, there was a United States of America. United States birthday is July 4th, 1776. That was when the United States was born. They were a new country in name only. They called themselves the United States of America, but the British said, oh, no, you're not. You're still ours, and you're going to have to fight your way out of this. So they still had to fight a long war to win their independence. Yeah. So let me ask you some questions. Would it be worth fighting the most powerful army in the world to be free? They sure thought so. They did. Yeah. And they were so angry about everything that had happened to them, all the taxes, all the unfair rules. And then they decided to say that all men are free and ought to be free from a tyrannical rule. That means like a king telling them what they should do. But was really all men free? No, we have to remember that in the United States at this time, they still had slaves. And so even though they wrote that all men were created free, it would be a few years later, several years later, before it really all men were free in the United States when slavery ended. But we'll talk about that too this year. So, but this is exciting. The United States is born. Now I want you to watch a couple videos. This first one is funny. I want you to imagine that Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and Roger Sherman and Robert Livingston were all in an old rock band in 1776. What if they were old in a rock band? And what if they made a music video for King George III to say, you know what, buddy? We don't like you anymore. We're tired of you. We're going to become our own country. And it's too late for you to apologize for us to change our minds. It's too late to apologize. And that's what the song is called. It's imagining the Second Continental Congress. And the guy singing in the video is supposed to be Thomas Jefferson. It's imagining the Second Continental Congress writing the Declaration of Independence and telling the king it's too late to apologize. You'll enjoy that one. And then the next one is a Schoolhouse Rock video called Fireworks, because that's what we do on Independence Day, July 4th, isn't it? All right. Thank you for listening to this lesson. These lessons get exciting and even better. And so I want you to watch these two videos, and then we'll see you for social studies tomorrow. I think social studies is going to be one of your favorite subjects this year. You're going to really like what all we're talking about.